You're listening to HealthCall Live, the area's only live local interactive radio hour devoted to you and your health. Watch the video live stream on the HealthCall Facebook page and call us with your questions at 447-1190 or toll free at 800-333-1190. Here's your host, health and wellness correspondent, Lee Kelso.
Good morning. It is June 29th, a sunny Saturday morning, already 79 degrees. A great day to start a new program right here on WOWO, HealthCall Live. I am Lee Kelso, and man, I am so glad you are here. We're here to take your calls, answer your questions, so I hope you'll jump on the phone, be part of our program today. 447-1190 is the number to call. 833-447-1190 is the toll-free. We're also going to be taking questions on Facebook, so if you'd like to hit the search bar, enter HealthCall Live, and you'll be able to find us there and send us a message or two if you'd like. And we will be streaming live on Facebook soon, but this week our focus is here on the radio audience, and we're going to talk about prescription medications and the supplements that you take. You know, I took a look through my medicine cabinet this morning, and I found I have 2 oral prescriptions, and I use 1 topical prescription on a daily basis. But how many meds are in your bathroom? How common are they? Is there anything you ought to be doing while you're taking them? Is there something you don't know about those medications? What supplements are part of your regular routine? Is there a supplement you've been thinking about? Maybe you want to try? Well, there's no one better to answer those questions than the pharmacist and clinical nutritionist Gregg Russell, the owner of Fort Wayne Custom RX at 425 East DuPont Road, right behind the Casa restaurant right there. Gregg is our guest today. I know Saturday's a busy day at the pharmacy. I'm glad you came to join us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lee. Congratulations on your new show.
Well, thanks. So happy to have you here. All right, so I'm going to assume that most commonly in the medicine chest is statins. That's probably number 1 across the board, right?
It certainly is.
All right, so we're going to put that aside for a second. What other than that is the drug that you see most commonly prescribed for your patients?
Well, actually, if you look at the most commonly prescribed drugs across the whole country, which includes prescription items that we do at our pharmacy, it's probably the thyroid medications. A lot of people are taking thyroid.
So you're talking about, I assume, low thyroid, hypothyroidism, right?
That is correct.
So that can result in a number of symptoms, everything from weight gain, fatigue, irritability, hair loss, constipation, lots of different challenges. Incredibly
a large amount of things. That little tiny gland basically controls your whole life.
Yeah.
And if there's tiny amounts of thyroid hormone being released every day, and if you're a little bit off, it can make a huge difference in how you feel.
How long do you think people typically go through those symptoms before they get diagnosis and treatment?
Oh, sometimes it can be years because some of those symptoms are so subtle, they're just not really recognized.
And what do I need to know about those thyroid medications that I might be taking?
Well, there's a lot of things that need to be counseled when you are taking thyroid because it's such a strong, potent hormone and it's made in very tiny amounts. It needs to be dosed really on an empty stomach all by itself, and you need to avoid any type of medications or supplements at the same time.
Oh, so I need to take my thyroid med on an empty stomach with nothing else. So do you recommend morning, night? Does that matter?
I'm not so sure it matters. Traditionally or historically, we've dosed it in the morning early, and people would basically put the tablet with a glass of water beside their nightstand and take it before they could even get up in the morning and give it an hour or two to absorb before they had their breakfast and their coffee. Mm-hmm. However, some interesting studies are starting to now talk about, well, it might be even easier, especially if they don't take medications at night, to just take it before they go to bed. And one of the reasons is the T4 or the levothyroxine component of thyroid has a really long half-life. So it's starting to work, really 3 or 4 hours after you take it is when it's going to peak.
So I'm going to be on this medication for the rest of my life. Are there any downsides to that? Any concerns? Anything I can do outside of the medication to help support my thyroid?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do for your thyroid. For example, a lot of the issues that we see with thyroid is secondary to maybe toxins that people are being exposed to on a daily basis by eating poor nutrition, for example. If you eat a lot of processed foods, there are certain preservatives and things in those foods that actually do attack your thyroid or certainly interfere with the thyroid. And a lot of that's the bromides that are preservatives that are in the foods.
So eat a clean diet, and that's going to help your thyroid.
That's for sure.
So at what age am I going to start seeing these symptoms pop up, and do you think that we ought to have a standard process for everybody should be thyroid screened?
Well, I think probably by the time people are 35 or 40, certainly all women, when they become pregnant, should be screened for thyroid, because that's a lot of times when it starts to rear its ugly head, is when there's a big change in your physiology. I think probably most people start experiencing thyroid issues in their mid-30s to 40s. However, we see teenagers and children have thyroid issues, so those are case by case, but most people, it's in their 30s and 40s that we start seeing that.
And I know it runs in families, so you need to be aware if a family member does, you might also be at risk.
That's correct. And there's a lot of connections to people who also have thyroid disease are at higher risk for developing things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease also.
Yeah. It's funny that tiny little gland in your throat has such a huge impact.
And you think about it, it takes 80,000 micrograms to make a baby aspirin, and we're dosing 25 micrograms on thyroid. So it's a very powerful medication.
Wow. Yeah, okay. So, we hear all the time that you should be telling your doctor about all the medications you take and all the supplements you take. What makes that such a big deal?
Well, I think sometimes people have a tendency to ignore the power of their supplements and how that might potentially cause problems with their medications, or vice versa, how medications can actually cause us to become nutrient depleted. And so I always recommend that, especially a patient who's taken more than 2 or 3 medications, you're taking 5 or 10 medications, you are probably at risk for either having drug interactions or having what I call drug-induced nutrient depletion, which we're just starting to really understand the science on that.
So I need to do what? Take a list of all my meds? Because I might be seeing 2 or 3 doctors. And how closely do they watch all of that?
Well, probably not as closely as we'd like to. And unfortunately, doctors, they're very busy people. And medications have gotten so technologically advanced, and they're so potent anymore that I think really your pharmacist is your number one advocate. And really, we're not talking about just a look through of the medications. You probably really need to sit down with that pharmacist, whether it's somebody like us or whether you want to go to your own community pharmacy. We recommend that you at least contact your pharmacist and talk to them and look for the obvious problems.
That is a foreign concept to me. I just can't imagine when I go into one of the big chain stores. I mean, the pace of action in that pharmacy, the line at the counter is crazy. And they always ask, do you have any questions for the pharmacist? But I have yet to see somebody ask anything meaningful. Can I get time with those guys? Are they really willing to sit down and talk with me?
Well, I think that's going to be case by case by each pharmacist. Most pharmacists really want their patients to maximize the use of their medication. And they are playing beat the clock. There's no doubt in today's environment for those community pharmacies. But there certainly are independent pharmacists that aren't, that have set up systems. In our pharmacy, for example, we have 2 pharmacists there at any one time, so we do have that availability to have a pharmacist sit down with you. We prefer people to make appointments with us because that way we can schedule it in.
We're going to talk a little bit more with Gregg Russell from Fort Wayne Custom RX about some of the things that make his particular pharmacy a little bit different. But first, I have to get to the HealthCall disclaimer today. The information shared on the program is not intended as diagnosis, treatment, or as a substitute for professional medical advice. Now, I think most rational people understand that even though we're giving away credible information here, it's free. You didn't pay anything for it, but it is no substitute for seeing a healthcare professional. So look, I know because you're listening to this program, you're already smarter than most people, and chances are you're better looking than your neighbor too. So I hope you're not offended by this glaringly obvious disclaimer, but lawyers being what they are and all, had to take care of business. And we hope that you will be a part of the program. Give us a call at 447-1190, 833-447-1190 with your questions about medications and supplements. We'll be right back with more of HealthCall Live.
You're listening to HealthCall Live, your regular Saturday morning appointment with healthcare professionals, where treatment is always painless and there's never a copay. Here's your host, health and wellness correspondent Lee Kelso.
Back to the program. The phones are open at 447-1190. The toll-free is 833-447-1190. We are here with Gregg Russell, certified pharmacist and nutritionist from Fort Wayne Custom RX up there, 425 East DuPont Road. In the second half hour, we're going to be talking with Dr. Thomas Lazoff about a treatment using magnetic energy to stimulate neurons and change behavior in a number of conditions. So that's coming up in the next half hour here on HealthCall Live. Gregg, you are, as I just said, a nutritionist, a clinical nutritionist. What role does that play in how you help me with my health care?
Sure. Well, nutrition is, it's underlying, it's the building stone for all of our health, right? We can probably all agree on that. We see time and time again about this diet or that diet affecting weight loss, etc. And I think as a nutritionist, what I look at, okay, you've got a certain health condition. So let's go back to that thyroid example. What could we do to help somebody? Well, we could try to find foods that would give important cofactors. So we would look at finding those foods, or we might even talk about doing some type of a supplement replacement. So, for example, we might use zinc. Zinc is really important in thyroid. We might make sure the patient's also getting selenium and a little bit of iodine. And we have to be careful how much iodine, but iodine and zinc, and then there's an amino acid called tyrosine. And why do we give those? It's because actually the thyroid hormone's made up of tyrosine and iodine. And if you don't have tyrosine in your diet, or you don't have iodine in your diet, then you can't produce that thyroid hormone yourself. So we look at things from that kind of an angle. How can we help that way?
Let's help somebody on the phones right now. Shane is with us. Shane, what's your question this morning for Gregg Russell?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I recently was prescribed 20 milligram propranolol for headache prevention. And I had two questions centered around that. And the first is just your opinion on the overall effectiveness of that drug. And then secondly, are there any long-term adverse side effects of taking that medication for 15 or 20 years?
Sure. Great questions. Propranolol is a beta-adrenergic blocker. And how it works is it tries to stop a cascade effect that occurs with migraine headaches. So we now know that there are certain triggers. People will say, hey, I did something and that maybe gave me a trigger, and that causes the vessel to start spasming. And the beta-adrenergic blockers like propranolol, and there's a whole list of beta-adrenergic medications. However, propranolol gets into the brain. It's fat soluble, so it gets into the brain, and as a result of that, it helps stop or reverse some of that spasming, and it tries to stabilize it. So a lot of times it's used as a preventative. You take it daily to try to stop that cascade effect. Propranolol itself, probably the biggest issue we have is you have to start with a kind of a low dose and work on it slowly. And for some people, it can give them things like nightmares because it can get into the brain. And some people don't tolerate that very well. They don't really want these night terrors that they get. Other things that can happen is because it's kind of the brake on some vessels, it's also the brake on the heart. And so if you were, let's say, an athlete, high school football player, runner, things like that, it's not going to cause a heart attack, but you might feel like you're having one because it can slow your heart down enough that it's not pumping the blood fast enough, and people will get kind of lightheaded or faint. And so some people just don't tolerate it real well. But as far as long-term, we would want to look again at those specific nutrients. Zinc is another one there, as well as some of the B vitamins that can be affected by taking propranolol long-term.
Oh, Shane, thanks for your call. Appreciate it. Thanks for being with us here on Healthline. We're going to roll ahead to Tom. He's on the line now with a question about CBD. Tom, you're it.
There. I'm just curious if you can tell me what you think about CBD. I'm seeing it everywhere, and I don't know a lot about it.
Well, that's a nice wide open question about CBD. There's probably in all my years of pharmacy, which is now well over 35 years, I have not seen a product ever take off with public interest like CBD. CBD oil is everywhere, and it's very controversial, and even legislation in the government's very confused on how it should be used. So let's look at a couple of real basic facts. First of all, CBD comes from a hemp plant, and that hemp plant is part of the same family as the cannabis plants. However, it's not cannabis, and hemp has CBD oil in it, whereas cannabis has THC, which is the illegal substance marijuana, and has some CBD in it also. So in the United States, it is now legal federally through the passage of the Farm Bill in 2018 to be able to sell CBD that's derived from hemp only, not from cannabis. But that's caused a lot of confusion amongst consumers, because the thought is, well, am I taking a drug that's hallucinogenic? And what we know is that CBD itself doesn't hit the same places in the brain that THC does. So there's no addiction potential unless you're consuming huge amounts of it, and realistically you couldn't afford to do that because it's too expensive.
So what are you seeing it being effective for?
Well, and this is the crazy part, is because it's just kind of new to the market, the product there's not a lot of studies on it, but there's a commercially prescription product that actually has been approved for a rare form of seizures. So we know that it will help certain seizure types. However, we don't know a lot of other things that it can treat. However, I can tell you anecdotally, and this is my opinion and just my observation, there's no published work on it, that we have a lot of patients coming and using it for chronic pain. So like back pain, knee pain, joint pain, arthritis. And it appears to have an effect because patients keep coming back and buying it. Now, Lee, you're probably going to ask me, where would I buy my CBD oil?
Yeah, I'm not buying it at a filling station, for goodness sake.
I mean, one of the biggest problems about CBD is if it's not grown right and it's not refined properly, it has a ton of it can have a ton of contaminants in it, and those contaminants can take the form of pesticides or minerals or heavy metals. And so, of course, nobody wants something with heavy metals that they're going to consume. So, last place you want to do is get it at a gas station. I recommend you get it at a reputable pharmacy, somebody who understands it, because there is potential for drug interactions with that too.
So does it matter whether it's a gummy or an oil or a chocolate? I mean, what seems to be, there's even topical creams.
Oh, yeah.
What do you see being most effective for people?
Well, probably the most effective has been the oil solutions. Most CBD is soluble in oil, and so most products are going to be oil-based. In Indiana, you have to buy a CBD oil that you can get the information, those little funny codes on the boxes. I think they're called QR codes. Is that correct?
Could be.
Yeah. Well, those codes, you can use a smartphone or a computer, and you can look up and you can see the content of THC, which has to be under 0.3% to be legal to be sold. However, some companies will also show the pesticide residues and how much heavy metals there is. And so it's important to find companies that put those in so that you know you're getting a real clean product.
All right. And, of course, that's something that you can get at Fort Wayne Custom RX, 425 East DuPont Road. Tom, thanks for your call about CBD.
It's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. We're running out of time here, Greg. I wanted to touch base on one other thing, and that is if I am concerned about very specific elements in some medications, you custom compound at your pharmacy, right? Can you give me just 30, 40 seconds on why I might need that?
Sure. Well, basically, we make things that aren't commercially available and for people that have needs that can't be met with commercial medications. So we do a lot of things for animals. We do a lot of things for kids. We do a lot of things that are allergy and dye-free type preparations.
There you go. That is Gregg Russell. He is a pharmacist, a clinical nutritionist, and the owner of Fort Wayne Custom RX at 425 East DuPont Road. Find them online at fwcustomrx.com. And Greg, I'm going to invite you to come back again in the future. We'll talk about the gut-brain interaction.
Oh, that is fascinating stuff. We'd love to talk about that.
All right, so we're going to see you again soon. We're going to look into brain treatments that help relieve the symptoms of depression, anxiety, sleep disruption, neurocognitive of conditions. It's drug-free. I find it totally fascinating. And Dr. Thomas Lazoff from Mindset PRTMS is our guest in the next half hour of Health Call Live right here on WOWO, 1190 AM and 107.5 FM.